Welcome back to Unleashed at Work and Home, the podcast dedicated to helping pet professionals feel less stress and find more joy in their day-to-day lives. My guest today is Julie Fudge Smith. She's the owner of A Positive Connection Dog Training, a co-host of Your Family Dog podcast, and the designer behind Animal Centric Designs. Welcome, Julie. Thanks for joining me today.
Well, thanks, Colleen. I'm really excited to be here. So this is very fun. I feel quite honored to be your guest. I mean, considering that the caliber of people you have had on here, you're really slumming it today. But thank you for having me. So for all those ordinary people out there, that's why Colleen's interviewing me. For all you extraordinary people, listen to the other podcasts. So.
I think all of my guests are awesome people, regardless of what letters go after their name or any of those things. It's all about just real people in real life. And I'm very glad that you are here today.
Well, thank you.
The word I chose for you is a tricky one, and it's grace. And when I was thinking about grace, that's a word that comes up for me often with you. And for me, the connotations that arise with it are sort of the state of being open and self-aware and having sort of a courteous goodwill. That phrase came up in a little bit of my research on this, and a willingness to dabble in uncertainty, to be comfortable with discomfort. So some of those were some of the aspects that has struck me about your behavior over the years, because we've known each other many, many years. I don't recall how many years we've known each other now.
It goes back to Molly, the difficult dog that we had. That would have been 2002.
Okay.
2002, I think, is when I called All About Dogs, because I think it was 2003 when we put her down. So yeah, because you were the person I talked to when I first called about Molly. So yeah, 2002.
So in 17 years, I've had many opportunities to see you behaving with incredible grace. And so what I would like to start with, if you're comfortable, is just sort of tell me from the perspective of one of your hats, owner of A Positive Connection, co-host of Your Family Dog, or designer of Animal Centric Designs, what does a tough day look like? What's a hard day?
Oh, well, it's funny. I wake up every day, and I probably, like most people, have an idea of what my perfect day is going to be like. And usually before my feet hit the ground, it's gone off the rails. I've never had that perfect day. But most of the time I have a pretty good day. And a bad day for me is when, if it's with a client in A Positive Connection, it's a day when I feel as if I haven't made a real connection with the client that I'm working with, that I haven't been able to explain to them clearly what my objective is with them, or to be able to help them understand that I'm working towards their objectives, but there's ways to get there. We can't necessarily go straight at the objective. Or to feel as if I have failed them or their dog, that in some way, shape, or form, when I have walked away from my session with them, they and their dog are not better off. And I feel those are really hard days for me, when I feel as though I haven't made an improvement in somebody's life. And that's when it's very difficult for me to extend grace to myself, to say, you tried your best and not every day can go well. But it's when I feel as if I have failed in some way, shape, or form, that, especially to a client, that I haven't made their life better, that it's hard to find the grace in the day.
Yeah.
And when I'm dealing with Your Family Dog, that's mostly pretty much joyful for me. That becomes difficult when I realize, oh my heavens, I am 3 podcasts behind in my engineering, and it's due tomorrow. And so those are the days that are difficult for me with Your Family Dog, is when I haven't stayed on top of getting things done the way they need to be done, because then I find myself beginning to perhaps resent it just a little bit, that I still have to do all this stuff. Now, once I sit down and do it, I generally enjoy it. I enjoy listening to the podcast again and and figuring out the engineering aspect of it. But it's getting in my own head and not being able to, I guess, just sort of relax into the moment. Those are tough days for me too, when I can't just accept the moment for the moment that I have.
Yeah.
So I would say those are probably the two big things is when I can't accept the reality of where I'm at right now. And when I feel as though I have failed a client in some way. Those are tough days.
Those are really good because they are different and they kind of neatly fit into the burnout and compassion fatigue boxes too. So burnout being so much
always aim to please, Colleen. Always aim to please.
Look at that right there. Burnout is often about circumstances and tasks and resources, and you saying like, I have to get all of this done and the deadline is coming up at me. That's sort of the recipe for burnout. And then compassion fatigue is the emotional drain and the challenges that go with it. And that was where you were talking about your clients. And one of the sticky parts is most people who have all of the circumstances, the burnout pieces completely under control, are at less risk for compassion fatigue. But none of us seem to have all of the circumstances under control. We're all, running behind our to-do lists going, wait, I have to get 12 more things done before I can go to sleep. So it does become the recipe that we hit the resentment and we hit the self-criticism and have difficulty extending grace to ourselves and sometimes to others because we're depleted. And so that was interesting how that fit so neatly into those two blocks. So when you're saying that, like that you would then struggle to show yourself grace, what do you do to try to support yourself in these rougher moments?
Well, when it comes to when I feel as though things aren't going well with a client or that I haven't made the difference that I wanted to make, I find it useful to talk to another professional, to try and talk to you, to talk to one of the veterinarians that I know, to find somebody in the business and say, look, this is what I'm facing. Am I missing something here? Is there something else that I need to be? Is there another way in which I need to be looking at this? And that is generally helpful. And also to realize, do I need to actually be more honest with myself and say, have I put myself into a situation that is beyond my skill set? Mm-hmm. Maybe the reason why I'm not doing as well for my client is because I don't have the capacity to do that. And maybe it's time for me to suggest that they see another professional to aid us in the training, whether it's to see their vet to make sure, for example, one of the things I always do, especially if I'm dealing with older dogs that may have sudden behavior changes, is I absolutely insist on a vet visit to make sure that there's no underlying organic physical causes. But oftentimes I'll say, look, we need to be thinking in terms of, since we've been trying this and we haven't made this big shift, we need to look at the problem in a different way. And having somebody else to talk to about that and to bounce ideas off of, I find to be really helpful. And also too, I do try, this is hard, I do try to remember that, you know what, you can't fix everybody and you can't fix everything, and you're not going to get along with everyone, and you just might not be the right trainer for these people. Those are hard realizations for me and hard ones to take. But I'm getting much better at it. I had a phone call the other day, which was really quite odd. And I did say to the woman, she wanted to use a particular kind of training collar. And I said, if you want to use that, I'm not the trainer for you. That's kind of the bottom line. So I'm taking, part of me feels like one of the things I am doing better about taking care of myself is setting limits that I know are good for me. Mm-hmm. Like, I will not train with somebody who insists on using electronic collars. I just won't do it anymore. And it may be my obligation to get them to turn away from it, but maybe the best way for me to do that is to say, I won't do that. I'm not the trainer for you, because that gets them to ask me questions. So what I'm finding is that in some ways, understanding what my limits are and trying to recognize those and stay within realistic limits for me helps to prevent some of those things. The other thing I try to do is realize that sometimes I get caught up in wanting to do what the client wants to do, which is to fix the problem immediately, when I understand there's no immediate fix. And those are hard ones. And those are ones where I will generally take the client and we'll take part of the next session and sit down and say, okay, let's talk about the improvements we've made, but let's talk about what we're looking at as far as, serious changes, and can you really commit to this? So I find that talking to others, the other thing that I have found as I've gotten older, and I'm getting older all the time, one of the things I found as I get older is I'm much better at being able to take a little bit of a distance and say, that's not right for me, and it's not right for you, and I need to walk away from this, and realize that there's nothing wrong with saying, this is a bad match. Let me find you a better match. And also too, when you're talking about the goal setting, one of the things that I've learned in really in the last couple of years or so, but really put into place in the last 6 months, was goals that are not, how do I say, perhaps more open-ended. Like, for example, I've lost a bunch of weight, and instead of making my goal weight a number, I have a range. So there's a 5-pound range. And as long as I reside in that 5-pound range, I'm a pretty happy woman. I'd rather be on the lower end of the range than the upper end. I get that. But it allows me not to fixate on one particular number, which would then define me as either as a successful person or a failure. If I have a range, I have a little bit of a comfort zone. And so when I'm making a to-do list, I try to make a to-do list for the week, not the day. So because if I make it for the day, there's no way I am ever going to fulfill all of these things, because, by golly, things happen. Like Zuzu wants her walk.
Crazy.
What do you mean you want to? Yeah, crazy dog. You want to go for your walk. You want to play ball. You want to spend time with me. Come on, I have to vacuum. So to do a to-do list for the week is easier for me. The other thing is to realize to prioritize projects, because, for example, I just redid a spare bedroom, which, if you look at the spare bedroom, looks really nice and looks very simple. And why would that take you as long as it did? Well, I had to construct the beds. And so the beds have slats. There are 32 tabs on each bed. That's 64 tabs. And I have arthritis in my hands. So it took me a little bit longer to get all 64 tabs in. And when I put one of the curtains up, it went up. The curtain rod broke in my hand. So I had to go out and buy new curtain rods. And so I sort of put that project as first. And if I got that done, then maybe I might be able to clean the rest of the house. So what I found is that it's also been helpful for me to not only put things on this is what I'm going to do this week, but what's the priority project? And to not put a time limit on that priority project, because stuff happens. Like 64 tabs happen, and window treatments happen, and I have to iron the curtains because they came they were all balled up, and the bed skirts need ironing. So I had to budget in an hour's worth of ironing, and so that's been helpful to reduce some of the stress by trying to be more realistic in assessing what a goal ought to be. And I think that's how I've been able to sort of give myself a little bit more grace in life, because I've been willing to say, I have limits. I can't do everything. So what can I do, and how can I do it in a way that, just like with my training, that's humane and positive towards myself, which was a real lesson for me to learn. I might have been gracious and positive and accepting of others. That didn't necessarily translate back to me.
That is so common. So common for people to be really gracious and accepting and wonderful with others, and so hard on themselves. It's amazing in my coaching calls how many people struggle with that.
Yeah.
This whole piece of extending themselves a little bit of grace and a little bit of flexibility. And when you were talking about the bigger projects, I think that can be an important piece too, because we all have things that we think are important that we're going to do someday. And sometimes it's a matter of allocating some time to it, even though we're not going to hit the finish line right away. But we need to make sure that within every week and all the busy, urgent, but not especially important in terms of our heart work, that we are also adding in a little bit of time for the important, but not necessarily urgent. Like there was no deadline, like the guest room must be done. And yet getting the guest room done was important to you. And so you needed to not necessarily have this timeline on it, but have time available to give to it. And so that could be for different people, different things. That's where all the self-care stuff kind of falls away too, where, walking your dog or playing with your dog or writing a novel, which you happen to be doing, or learning to play an instrument, or any of these things that are important to people. Sometimes either we put a really tight goal on it, where, the SMART goals, and then we don't achieve it and then beat ourselves up for them. Or we just say someday when I have time, and we don't even do a little.
Right. And I was going to say, as far as like, one of the things that I have learned as far as writing goes, and this would apply to things besides writing, I have a writing buddy, and she and I have been writing together for over 5 years now. And I was writing my blogs. Not my blogs have suffered a bit. But she was working on a novel and I work on my blogs, and we met once a week. We decided that wasn't enough. So we meet 2 mornings a week, and it's on the calendar. Now, what happens is, like, in the next few weeks, like, I'm going to go visit my sister, and then she's going to Colorado. So there'll be 2 weeks we won't meet. Still stays on the calendar, so that when I get back and she gets back, we resume. So I know one of the things that's so easy to do is to say, oh, we missed 3 times, so we're never going to do this. Mm-hmm. No, we decided right up front that it didn't matter how many we missed. It was going to stay on the calendar, and we were still going to do it. And we committed to it. And I find that having that on the calendar, so I'm committed to it 2 mornings a week to write, and we do it at a time before either one of us has to get to work. That's been really helpful. And then the second thing is to allow the flexibility that if we can't do it for a couple of weeks, doesn't matter. It's still there and it still gets done. And so I have found that you kind of have to do it both ways. You have to be smart about it and put it on the calendar and treat it as if it's a dentist appointment, but also understand that it's not a dentist appointment, but it still exists. And so you are committed to it even if you can't make it. And that has been very helpful to me in order to be able to get some of the stuff done that I really wanted to get done.
Okay. So when you were talking about, having it on the calendar, regardless of whether or not you're able to meet, that like it is just there, that so it can give you this framework for your weeks and for your mindset, but then allowing yourself the flexibility of that life happens. There are weeks that it will not occur, even though you've got it scheduled. I think that's a great example of grace, of having some flexibility with behavior and recognizing that you're still working toward the ultimate goal, even though not every single day is going to hit some benchmark that you would count as being the good productive day.
Yes. And I think the reason it works is not because we fell into it. I think it works because we actively thought about what is it that we want to achieve. What is it that we want? We want to write with one another. Once a week's not enough. Twice a week is better. But we also had both been part of groups that just fell apart because people missed stuff and, we absolutely can't do it. And we just very actively decided from the beginning that we are committed to this no matter what. And I think sometimes grace is an active decision. It's not just infused into you by the Holy Spirit, although that happens sometimes too. But I think grace has to be an active decision on your part, that I'm going to extend this grace to myself. I am going to extend this grace to someone else, even if I don't want to, because it's better for me, it's better for them, and it's better for this world to be kind when I can. So that's sort of my philosophy. Now, how often I achieve that, that's really questionable. But but I was just thinking, I have one minor example that I thought about but which was where grace was another active decision on my part. The other day, I was, there's this clothing line that I like, and they sell it through home shopping, right? So you have a little party and everybody comes. Well, one woman and I have been combining our parties at her house. She's got this gorgeous house. It's great. It's really set up well for this. And our representative came, and she and the other hostess were talking about they used to work for this organization, and they both got pretty much messed over by it. They were treated very unfairly, very unkindly. And for the first time, they kind of both let loose with what happened and their opinion of the CEO of this organization. And I thought, okay, you were messed over. The next day, those of us who were there got an email from the representative saying, I'm really sorry I did this. I had talked about how I had found grace in my life towards this person. And then I said all these things and I feel really bad, felt I went over the line. And I thought to myself, everybody's going to email back, oh, that's okay. I didn't think anything of it. You're fine. And I thought it took a lot of courage for her to admit this. She deserves more than the perfunctory, it's okay, I didn't mind. So I took the time to compose an email to her saying, I understand what you were saying. I appreciate the fact that this was difficult for you and that you were, because having put my own foot in my mouth on numerous occasions, I know how hard it is to admit that one has done that. And to do that was really very gracious of you. And I appreciate the fact that you were willing to admit when you were wrong to us. That said, I didn't think anything of it after I left. And I went on to explain a few other things and saying that, she still means a lot to me and this would not affect me. I know that she was messed over, and the fact that you're trying to, show this kind of grace towards others, I thought was really good, because I thought she deserved some recognition for making for the mea culpa. Me saying, I really think I behaved poorly. It's hard to stand up and say, I behaved like a total jerk and really goes against my morals. And I didn't like the way I acted. And so for somebody to say that, even if I didn't think that, for me, just dismiss it as, it's fine. This wasn't really fair.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of thought, how can I approach this by letting her know that it didn't really affect me much, but I appreciate what she did. So basically, took a deep breath, asked the Holy Spirit for the right words, and typed the email. And true to form, most of the people said, oh, it doesn't matter to me. That was just fine. But many of them were very gracious, saying, I couldn't have said it better. Julie said it just right, and I agree with her completely. So it also gave her positive affirmation of this is what this person said was what I also wanted to say, which is more than just saying, oh, it's just fine.
Yeah. And it's acknowledging her own personal growth and development, which is something that we're all doing all the time.
Yeah.
And so to just go like, oh, that was fine, might not have helped her move the needle on that uncomfortable moment.
Right.
Of having had the mental realization that how she behaved wasn't how she would choose to behave, given more thought and reflection. And that by showing up again and saying, I would have liked to have made a different choice in the past, and I intend to make a different choice in the future. You gave her a way to cement that learning in her brain. You reinforce that whole idea of look at you showing up how you want to show up and not how we want you to show up, because we were fine with what you did.
Right.
We want you to show up how you inside, what matters to you, what's important to you.
Yeah. And that was part of it, is I didn't want her just to feel as though then, because what can happen sometimes there is if somebody says, oh, you were just fine, then you doubt whether or not your behavior was what you thought it should be. To me, sometimes there's more humiliation and embarrassment from that than from what I did the first time, because it's like, am I making this out to be more than what it should? Am I sort of reverse grandiose here? Am I, trying to make myself more important than what I am by admitting something that wasn't, So sometimes it actually makes it worse for me when somebody can't say to me, wow, yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying. And I understand how you feel because yeah, I've done that. I've been there. Actually, then you're right. It helps me to make changes in my behavior. But if somebody just sort of dismisses it, then that sends me into a whole different spiral. It's like, all right, I already spiraled down once. So I'm down here on this ledge. And what you said is, it means I have to spiral down to the next one because that's exactly where I'm going. I can't crawl. I can't crawl my way back up or climb the ladder out of this ditch because I have to spend time spiraling down even further because I'm worse of a person than I thought I was, but in a different way. So I'm worse of a person than in a way I hadn't even thought of before. It's like, wow, thanks so much for that. So part of it was like, I didn't want her, because I know her well enough, didn't want her spiraling down any farther. I also feel like it's so unfair to diminish somebody else's experience, especially if they're trying to do something on personal growth, or they're trying to do something like, I was not the person I want to be. And I don't want to make them feel worse, but I also don't want to diminish the feelings that they had in the sense of, yeah, that's real. I understand that. Been there. Because that's where you can then make the real personal growth, as you said, because it's somebody else saying, I get that.
Yeah.
I'm not dismissing it. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm acknowledging it. And it's the acknowledgement of it, I think, was what opened the door for change. So I remember one time I went to confession and the priest said to me, this is a really selfish confession. And I was like, did you want me to confess what my husband's done wrong? Because I'm happy to do that. That's what I was thinking. And what I realized is that I think what he meant was that I wasn't thinking about how I had hurt others. I was thinking too much in terms of how I had sort of damaged my relationship with God. And so, yes, he was right. But I also thought, you've missed the point here, dude. This is where I'm at right now.
Yeah.
This is where I think I'm causing the most damage is my relationship with God because of the way that I am doing things. This is not helpful. But I'll be happy to confess my husband's sins if that's what you really want. So I think it's important to hear what the other person is saying as well. That's the time when I feel as if I'm most successful at being gracious or using grace with others is when I take the time not to hear what I think they're saying, but to genuinely try and hear what they're saying, what they're trying to communicate. Which may not be what I think they should communicate because I can tell them what I think they ought to communicate and how they ought to feel. But I also hate that too. You really shouldn't feel that way. I just want to say, really? Because, you're right. I probably shouldn't, but I got news for you, dude. That's how I do feel. So can we just kind of go from there?
Yeah, really recognizing what's important to that individual in that moment is key, even if we don't agree with the conclusion or anything, but to say, I can see that this is important to you, and I'm happy to be the recipient of you sharing it, not shutting it down, not, no, don't feel that way, or that's ridiculous, or any of those things don't help that person in the moment.
No, because that sends me down that other spiral. It's like, darn it, I've hit this ledge now. Once again, it's like chutes and ladders, right? I'm going down those chutes. I'm not crawling up any of the ladders.
So what would you have as your tips for pet professionals who would like to develop a little bit more personal grace? Where would you suggest they start?
What I found has really been useful is I listen to people talk to me about their dogs. And they'll say to me, oh, he's really stubborn, or like this, or like that. And I'm like, gosh, I hear that. But then I usually look at the dog and say, wow, this is really hard for you, isn't it? And by showing compassion to their animal opens up, because then it's not me saying, well, you're wrong. The dog's not being stubborn. You are just really bad at communicating to him. what it is he needs to do. Because like that opens a lot of doors, right?
Totally.
So instead, because it's just like, let me tell you how you failed. Which does
people love that.
that. Yeah.
Not so much.
I've really tried to abandon that tact. Just hasn't worked for me as well as I would have liked. It's kind of like, you really need to listen to me, so I'm going to tell you how you failed. Mm-mm. So what I have found is that I listen to what they're saying, and I generally say, well, generally I find dogs may or may not be stubborn. I don't think they're generally stubborn. I think sometimes they just don't really understand what we want them to do. And that's part of it. Or they might be uncomfortable. Or maybe they're a little afraid. And then I'll look at the animal and say, wow, this is hard for you, isn't it? It's really hard to be you right now. And when I'm actually talking to the animal, and usually the animal goes, yes, oh, thank you. It's just it's really hard. And I'm feeding, beef or liver or chicken or kangaroo, whatever. What I find is that one of the ways to be gracious to others is to be compassionate to their animals and to address the animal directly and say, wow, you're having a hard time. Let's see if we can't help you. And then turn to the owner and say, okay, this is how I think he's seeing things. And this is how I would interpret this behavior. So we need to help him be more comfortable. So it's not pointing out their failings so much as it's saying, this is how I see this guy. This is what he's telling me. How can we as a unit help him be comfortable in his world? Because, sometimes they have done some really bad stuff. Sometimes they've really messed their animals up. I can't change what they've done in the past, but I can try to bring them on board as a compassionate sort of partner with their dogs. And that's what I try to bring out. To show compassion for their dogs allows me to be gracious to them.
And it gives them a new way to write the story. And because we're such story creatures, that if we're writing the story that the dog is being stubborn or resistive or resentful or whatever, and you can help them see a new way to interpret the story, that same piece applies to ourselves. So that when we're busy beating ourselves up, sometimes talking to a friend or getting another perspective can give us another way to write the story, to see it, as just one scene in a longer piece and not the judgment and the final culmination.
Right. And there's sometimes I have to deliver bad news to these people. They have a dog who is terrified of everything in life. They've had it since a puppy. It met, 5 people before it was 6 months of age. And I have to talk to them about what socialization is and isn't. And give them, and I usually say, look, this is just for future reference. This is kind of what I'm seeing and why I'm seeing it. But I also always try to start with, being gracious towards them. That if I'm going to show compassion towards their dog, I also try to find a way to show compassion towards them, saying, this must be really hard for you. I know how difficult it is to have a barking dog. Nobody likes that. Or, it's really unfortunate that every time somebody turns around, he bites him in the rear end. It's not the way I want it to be either. And that must be really hard for you. It can be very embarrassing. It doesn't have to remain that way. So I think a recognition of what their problem is, a compassion towards them and some compassion towards that problem, then allows you to open the door to say, this is, because they always ask me why, and it's like, well. There are a lot of reasons. These might be contributing factors, and I hate to tell you this, but think of it as information for the future. So that sometimes I find that really, and I guess because I've had some unfortunate dogs in my own life, and I was dealt with extraordinarily compassionately and kindly, and with people who didn't judge me for what the decisions that we ultimately had to make about these 2 dogs. That is always on my mind, and always behind the way in which I try to talk to others. And I think the other thing is, it's a lot easier to be gracious to somebody if you're humble towards yourself. It's like, I know where you're coming from. I've been there. I've made some really bad mistakes. I've had some really difficult dogs, some of which were not my fault. Some things of which were my fault. So keep myself humble, not humiliated, humbled, allows me to be much more gracious to others. And I think there's a big difference between being humble. I see being humble or having humility, not being humiliated, as being right-sized with myself and with my God. And if I am right-sized with myself and with others and with my God, then I can be gracious and compassionate to you. If I am feeling humiliated, however, I'm not right-sized.
Right.
And I have a hard time not being obsequious. Mm-hmm. So I try to be the right size, the right amount of humility, and try to be humble because I don't know everything.
So from the perspective of a pet professional trying to apply this to themselves. So, because I think we're relatively good with our clients. So we all have our moments and our days where we're less good. But for most of us, it's easier to extend some grace toward others than it is toward ourselves. What would be one strategy that you would suggest people try to just extend a little bit more grace personally to themselves?
Well, in through your nose and out through your mouth. Take 3 or 4 deep breaths and then ask yourself, what would I tell my best friend? What would I tell my sister? What would I tell my mother in this situation? Can I say that to myself? Sometimes just honestly having a good cry really helps to get all those emotions out. You got to get the stuff out. But I find breathing, I find talking to somebody, and I find if you can, keep a sense of humor about yourself. By the end of the 64 tabs on that bed, I was laughing at myself because I had a pair of scissors and I'm like stabbing the tabs to try and get them to go in and realizing, okay, this is probably not the best way, but it's my way and it's the tool I have. Otherwise I'd have to get up and go get something else and I'm feeling too lazy. And to just try and have a sense of humor about the things that happen is helpful. And if you can, I mean, meditation is great for calming oneself. If I spend a fair amount of time each day just sort of trying to quiet myself internally and listen to that tiny voice of reason, which for me is the voice of God, but I think it can be the voice of a lot of different things. It can be just the voice of reason. It can be the voice of, sort of finding your inner Zen. But taking the time, I know. The other thing that suddenly occurred to me after, I don't know, how old am I? 61? I don't know, somewhere around 59 years, is that things don't always have to happen as quickly as I think they are, that I've got more time than I realize. That, something, one of the reasons why I love doing Find It with a dog, where I throw treats and they're snuffling around, is because it buys me time. And suddenly realizing, you know what? I can take a deep breath. I can take a moment that in most situations, 2 or 3 seconds is really okay for you to take to center yourself.
Yeah. And
so just time can really be your friend. And time can be very tiny increments. It's kind of like when I quit smoking. It had to, all my sins are coming out now. When I quit smoking, there were times I really wanted a cigarette. And so and it was like, okay, do I need a cigarette today? Yeah, I do. Do I need a cigarette this morning? Yeah, probably. Do I need a cigarette this hour? Could be. Do we need a cigarette this minute? Maybe. How about this second? Can I get through this second without a cigarette? Can I get through the next second without a cigarette? And pretty soon I've got well over 30 years of being smoke free, second by second. And that also helped recovering alcoholic. Also helped with recovery and drinking, although cigarettes were harder for me. So realize that you can boil things down to a second at a time. And another thing is helpful in being helpful to myself is not every thought I have, although that's hard to believe on this particular podcast because pretty much every thought I've had, I'm expressing, but not every thought I have has to be expressed. And when I stop expressing myself all the time, I don't put myself in situations where I then feel bad about myself or I feel regret or remorse or whatever. So one of the ways in which I can be the kindest to myself is take a deep breath, pause for a few seconds. Don't say the first thing that comes to my mind. And that's probably the 3 ways in which I'm the most gracious to myself.
Those are awesome. Those are wonderful tips. So if people wanted to learn more about you and your work, how could they do that?
They can look at my website, which is www.apositiveconnection.com or yourfamilydogpodcast.com. And if you're interested in any of my animal-centric designs, I don't have anything up at the moment, but you can always contact me through A Positive Connection if you're interested in note cards, or we do personalized stuff. I do all kinds of different things with it. So mugs, tea towels, all kinds of things with mostly dogs, but there are some other animals in there as well. So,
well, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about Grace. It's been fun catching up with you.
It's been really fun. Thank you, Colleen.
Thanks for listening to Unleashed at Work and Home. Are you looking for ways to feel better fast and make it last? Do you want more actionable ideas and strategies? Would you like to connect with other amazing pet professionals who care about helping animals and creating healthy, fun work cultures? If so, you are going to love the Unleashed Resilience community. Visit ColleenPilar.com/community for more information. I can't wait to see you there.